Alan Wade Lusick, February 27th, 1964. Spiritwood, Saskatchewan. Spirit would be about an hour and a half northeast of Saskatoon. A lot of friends were playing box lacrosse in Saskatoon at the time. This was at the sort of tail end of the 70s, 78, 79. I was playing a lot of football and hockey and a variety of sports. I always like to try different sports, biathlon, things of that nature. And then my buddies started saying, hey, why don't you come out and play lacrosse? But of course, I was so involved with so many other things, it just didn't seem to happen. And unfortunately, when they finally sold me on the game, box lacrosse was dying in Saskatoon, and the only game that was sort of on the horizon was field lacrosse for the most part. So although I've had a chance to play a little bit of box at camps and things, it just ended up being field as the number one sport for me. But the real key was the stick. The stick and the history actually caught me. I have two passions in my life, history and lacrosse, or lacrosse and history. I did it pretty well one-on-one. But my real passion in my current line of work is history. But it was the stick, the uniqueness of the stick that truly made it stand out from all other sports. You know, a hockey stick is basically, at the time, before you were allowed to have the Russian curve, as they called it, and those kinds of things, it was just a piece of wood, a lumber, really. But the uniqueness of the stick, the traditional pockets, the leather, you know, taking a beer bottle and shaving down your traditional, you know, stick, and those kinds of things were absolutely intriguing to me. I guess as a player, being part of the team that after 100 years of drought, if you will, in terms of winning a medal at a national competition, being a part of that team was a special time. And that was the Ross Victory Cup in Nanaimo, winning bronze for the first time. And then after that, we won silver, and after that, gold, and it is the result of some of the development that had gone on in Saskatchewan, specifically in a place called Sturgis, Saskatchewan, and a couple of brothers, Steve and Lyle Michaluk, for example, that took to the game and were able to you know, work their way all the way up to a national team. And ultimately, they became the foundation of a very tight program that allowed us to be very successful at the national level for a change. As a player, a real turning point, we would play internally within Saskatchewan quite a bit, but the real change came as a result of a push from a fellow in Calgary named Mr. Jim Burke. And Jim proposed to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta teams that we introduce a bit of a league, if you will. And it was a very interesting idea because in Western Canada, as I've mentioned in terms of the railroad and things like that, we fight geography. And the lack of local competition really and truly is 6 to 9 hours away. If anything, Edmonton would be 5 hours from, say, Saskatoon, but 8 from Regina. So it was a very difficult thing. So we came together under Jim's leadership here, and we came up with a format that we thought would work. And because of that length of time, Saskatchewan sort of became the middle ground. So the teams from Edmonton and Calgary would come to Saskatoon and Regina, but the distance for Winnipeg was too far, you know, for them to go all the way and skip over Saskatchewan. So Winnipeg would come and play in Regina and Saskatoon. They would play most of their games against the Alberta teams and only 1 or 2 games against the Saskatoon teams. Then our job was to go to Winnipeg. The Alberta teams would stay at home, and we worked out an interlocking season, and it was, for me as a player, probably the most instrumental in my own development, because you get to a certain level, but if you don't break out of that level of competition, and I think truly having the opportunity to coach with Gary Gait on the national team, junior national team, and then act as a manager for a second junior national team, what I noticed was Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba kids, they can play, but they just don't have that level of competition that allows them to handle the pressures of the world level or even, for some, the national level. I think for me it's the equipment. The changes that I've witnessed in terms of equipment and that evolution through there. The move from the wooden stick to, we used to call it Tupperware, the plastic, and the Super Light 2, which was just a horrible, horrible stick, but it was light and it allowed you to change the mesh and do some interesting things. So I guess the evolution of sticks to offset heads to pinches and all sorts of neat mesh kits, I guess that for me would be what I would consider the biggest change. The amount of work that's gone into helmets in Canada and the United States, the Cascades and things of that nature. So the protection in general, I think some of my buddies who used to play goal used to put an extra telephone book behind their pads, when they played box, so that they just wouldn't feel as much of the shots on the tops of their legs and things like that. I've become really fascinated with the way the game has expanded, both in our own country and overseas. I've been lucky enough to coach lacrosse from basically the Arctic Circle with a man named Russ Shepard, all the way down to Venezuela. I was working in South America for a couple of years and took a bag of sticks and started a 6-team little league in just off the coast of Venezuela. And the ability to see the game get picked up. I know the Americans have done a lot of work just because of their exposure, but watching teams like Japan come along, and I think the growth of the game in general has absolutely fascinated me. The last event in Israel, for example. So seeing how the game has, a traditional First Nations game in our country, has sort of webbed its way out. And of course we have, depending on the statistics you look at, up to 75 countries currently playing men's field. I find that a very interesting sort of evolution of the game. It was about 3 hours from everywhere, almost on the Manitoba border. So it was quite a distance from sort of the traditional areas of lacrosse for me, which was an issue because, as I said, my passions were history and lacrosse, or lacrosse and history. The first thing that's in my classroom is my stick. And as I said, the stick draws people. It's an interest point. And as a result of that stick, there were a lot of great athletes. Small town Saskatchewan, like many places, have great hockey players, and we've put a number of kids in the NHL and several from around the Sturgis area, Trent Yanni and all those types, and of course Wendell Clark and was just down the road, and so you have all that hockey tradition. So the kids were not shy from a little body contact or anything like that, but there was really not much to do. You played hockey in the winter and you played ball in the summer, and that was it. And there were a huge number of great players that came out of there. Brian Kopech a little bit later on, but Stephen Lyle would probably be two of those key kids that sort of came out. And they didn't know which end of the stick was up, basically. So taught them all the basics of it. And they weren't 100% sure they really wanted to play. Hockey was their focus, and that's all they kind of wanted to do. But just sort of wore them down to a point where they decided, okay, we'll give it a spin. We worked very hard throughout the winter and into the following spring, and we were given the opportunity at the time. The Saskatchewan Lacrosse Association had sort of 2 junior championships. They called it the Rural Division and the Urban Division. So teams in the bigger centers played themselves, and we would play various other smaller towns in Saskatchewan. So we arrived at the first championship, and nobody knew about us or anything of that nature. But of course, I'd put in a significant amount of time with the kids, and we sort of had any infraction was an automatic 10 push-ups. It didn't matter what you did, you dropped the ball or whatever it is. And the kids kind of got into that sort of vibe, if you will. And it wouldn't work today, but at the time it worked. And these kids just absolutely destroyed all the rural teams. And the only loss we took that year was to the urban team. So as a result, we won the first championship. As a result of our performance, the year that nationals were held, I was able to take the Sturgis team, this high school team, from a town of 750 people, And I think that counted with all the cats and the cattle and everything else that was in the area. 750 people. And we ended up taking them to nationals and playing in the gold medal game against Oshawa, the Oshawa Blue Knights. A storied program in our country, of course, and this is my first exposure to men like Stan Cockerton, Terry Lloyd, and basically, okay, it's on. Now, a town of 750 versus Oshawa, and the boundaries around Oshawa are fluid, shall we say. So a town of 500,000, let's say, and we give them a heck of a game. They barely beat us by, in fact, we were leading at half and all the way through, and they only beat us by 2 goals. And as a result of that performance, Steve and Lyle were clearly recognized by Terry and Stan, who were organizing some of the national teams at that point, that, well, there's some potential talent here. And as a result, they made the junior team that played in Long Island that next year and a half. You asked earlier about those greatest moments coaching and things. I think it's been the ability to help kids hone their skills, but their individual work ethic that comes out of a prairie kid, if I can use that term, allows them to become very successful. Just 2 years ago, a kid out of the Scorpions program and the local SWAT program scored a goal in the NCAA championships. These kinds of exposure points that have allowed kids to become so much better and then ultimately, with their work ethic, take the game to other levels has been truly a powerful experience as a coach. And that I've enjoyed, if you will. It's where they go after you've worked with them that it's exciting to see. And that's probably the biggest sort of thing I would say as a goal as a coach. But the ability to meet people over the roughly 30 years of involvement in the game, and coming from a small organization, you do everything, right? So I've been president to sector chairs and coaching directors and things of that nature. But it was also the work that I was exposed to at the Canadian Lacrosse Association that I found really interesting, because you have a collection of people, for the most part, that have no kids involved at any point now, and yet they're giving back to this game. They've been hooked by the game. And I met so many fascinating people and their willingness to give back to the game. Stu Begg, Tom Ingle, Stan Cockerton, Terry Lloyd. There's so many neat people that have given something back way above and beyond that I've seen people even do in other sports, if that makes sense. So lacrosse is really a unique Canadian game, obviously, but it gets into your blood, and I think that is the thing that really makes it so unique. I had a chance to play football, and I had a chance to play other sports and things like that, but this is the only game that gave me a natural high while playing it, to the point where it was incredibly difficult to put the stick down as a player. I've never liked coaching. I did it because I wanted to share the game and give other kids an experience with the game. But when you were playing, you just couldn't beat the high, the natural high that the game gives you. And I never really experienced that to the same extent in other sports. Even football, you run a play, and then you get 30 seconds to a half hour, and you go to sleep and have a nap and have a little lunch, and then you run another play. And that's not totally fair to say, but it's a slower game. And I know the differences, between box lacrosse, and they call field lacrosse more like a chess game. And the speed of the box and the strategy of field. I found that, again, is that hybrid kind of thing, such a unique game experience that it was hard to shake as a player to be done with it. It really was.